It's time for some r/ProRevenge, where Karens finally get some sweet karma. On today's show, this Karen lets her kids use her neighbor's yard without their permission, until one day the neighbor has enough and knocks on her door. What does she do that turns Karen's face immediately ghost white? You'll find out on today's r/ProRevenge. Happy birthday if today's your birthday, and on with the show. In college, my two friends and I decided to find a place together off campus. We found a beautiful 3-bedroom house with surprisingly affordable rent. The basement of the house was listed as a separate apartment, but as it had a separate entrance and the indoor stairwell had been blocked off, we weren't worried, and the thermostat was upstairs. Then the demon neighbor moved in. From upstairs, we could hear everything. This adult woman would call her mother and scream at her to pay for her cell phone bills and give her grocery money, aka Taco Bell and cheap tequila. She would scream at whatever guy she was sleeping with to bring her meth. And one day, she brought home 3 puppies to scream at too. We were terrified of this woman. And the noise was heck. Also, we'd been idiotic enough to sign a lease stating we were responsible for all utilities, period. Meaning we were now financially her gas, water, and electric. But with only 2 months left on the lease, we thought we could just ride it out. But then, she started smoking, constantly. According to the landlord, she'd quit for good when she'd signed the lease. But for good lasted 2 days. Since it was winter, the heat was running nearly 24/7, and the smoke was wafting up from the vents. Our apartment and all our belongings began to reek with smoke. We'd contacted the landlord because we signed for a non-smoking apartment. He told us we lived in a state where you could technically call an apartment non-smoking, even if it shared ventilation with a smoking apartment. Screw you, leasing laws. At this point, my 2 roommates were headed out for a 2-week vacation. They were online students, while I was residential, leaving me alone in the apartment with the demon smoker in the basement. I couldn't sleep or eat because my idiotic stomach decided to react to all the secondhand smoke by aching and cramping constantly. After 3 days, I was a little insane. I made a plan. I checked the forecast, lows in the 20s all week. I borrowed a friend's ultra-insulated sleeping bag. I bought one of those ski masks with the holes for your eyes and mouth. I got out my stocking cap, my silk long underwear, my woolen socks, and my down parka. I bought tea, hot cocoa, and ramen, and prepared to live off a diet of hot liquids. And I turned off the freaking heat. Day 1, she's screaming at her mother for forcing her to move into this frozen crap hole of an apartment. Day 2, she's screaming at her boyfriend, meth dealer, because he won't let her move in with him. Day 3, she's screaming at the landlord about how she's freaking freezing. Day 4, the landlord is at my door. I greet him in full ski mask, parka, stocking cap array, looking like I'm heading out to rob Santa Claus at the North Pole. He asks me if I don't find it a little chilly in the house. I reply, I found all the cigarette smoke a little warm. Day 5, she's screaming about the bees upstairs to anyone who will listen, and I'm sitting upstairs, clutching my car keys and my pepper spray with 911 typed into my phone. She finally decides she's freaking leaving and moving in with Greg, even though he just got out for stabbing Travis, and he lives in that freaking creepy house in the woods with all those jerk-biting dogs. Day 6, she's gone. I silently bless Greg. Moral of the story, there's a reason the rent seems too good to be true. I'm not sure who's more at fault here. Is it the bad tenant who lied on their application about smoking? Or is it the landlord who refused to do anything and just let it all happen? Let me know in the comments below who you think is more at fault. Since I'm still in school, I took a job at a bakery of types which I won't name. The place has bread in the name but also sells overpriced salads and sandwiches. I worked there for close to a year where I had this boss named Betty. Not her real name, of course. Betty and I didn't get along whatsoever. She had gotten the previous general manager to quit because she had an affair with him and she threatened to tell his wife if he didn't leave. He quickly left the job and she was promoted to the position. I didn't like her, but I have to respect the dedication to be the general manager of a small store. When I first started working there, I was respectful, but she would do things that would get on my nerves. For instance, I would clean all the places I would be hired to do, and once I was done and relaxed for maybe 5 minutes, she would run out of the manager's office screeching, "Why aren't you working?" I would tell her, of course, I did my job, and as a cashier, if nobody is there to help, then I didn't have anything to do. She would glare at me, then I would see her accidentally drop an entire pot of brewed coffee onto my freshly mopped floor for me to clean. So I learned quickly to always look busy. Once she realized I was going to kneel and kiss the ground she walked on, she started dropping my hours. The store ran on a Game of Thrones type politics for who got promotions and raises. Somehow, all her friends were managers and would bully the rest of us. She was barely at work. She would drive to my job, clock in just in case corporate decided to check her hours. So she was essentially stealing hours. When you clocked in, it printed out a small piece of paper telling when you clocked in. She would just drop them on the floor for me to clean up. I would usually pick them up and stick them into a pocket. So this led to me finding Betty clock in and out stubs in my pocket at my house. This will be important for later. Did I mention she was super racist? She was white, and most of the staff were my fellow high school peers, who were all mostly people of color. One day at work, she walked out and told us, "When you're on your clock, I own you." When we all reacted to look at her, she backpedaled and was like, "I didn't mean it like that." This will be important for later. So after a while, I got sick of practically begging for hours, so I went to my current job, but decided I merely wanted to drop my hours, which were already barely a day a week. But suddenly, when I got my new job, she scheduled me every single day of the entire week. She never did that even when we were on semi-good terms. So I obviously told her I had a new job and couldn't do this. After that, I went home and called my friends who was still working there to tell them I was going to quit tomorrow. He has a bad habit of putting his phone on speaker when he's cleaning at work. So Betty overheard this obviously. The next day I walk in and go through the respectful motions of saying, "Thank you for the opportunity" and blah blah blah. Betty let me get through the entire speech before she said, "Oh yeah, I was meaning to tell you, you're fired." I was so blindsided and ticked off, I cussed her out. My mum raised me to treat women with respect, but this freaking fat, overweight hippo looking bee ticked me the frick off. She's the type of girl to think binge eating was a personality trait. So I left and was mad about being fired before I could quit, but she didn't push the issue. I'm only 18 and I already had another job. I wasn't expecting Betty to give me a good reference anyway. I would have completely left it alone if it wasn't for the district manager Ben, not real name, texting me. The revenge. He thought I was still working there, so I explained to him I was fired. He was stunned due to the fact that I was a decent employee. He asked why she let me go, and I explained it to him, and he was angry. He clarified that she fired me before I quit, and I said yes. He was ticked that she did this, and asked if there was anything else she might have done. I kind of just vented to him for a bit. When I told him about the racist remark, he asked if anyone else would collaborate with me. I forgot to mention that she slowly fired and forced people to quit, and replaced them with her friends and family, which according to company policy, she couldn't do. Something about conflict of interest. I asked all the people who were working that day if they could, and a few said they would say they did. But one did even better. My one coworker Andy is convinced he's the next big vlogger. So he always has his phone out, or just using audio recording for hours for a chance to catch a funny clip. I've watched his content and let me say, it's just super cringe. But turns out, he labels each recording by the day and times. So when he checked, he found her making racist remarks. I got a brilliant idea, and with my other fired or co-workers forced to quit, we decided to scour Andy's recordings. We found some great moments of Betty saying controversial things or just being nasty. Like once a guest sneezed on the baked pastries, and when a coworker told her, she laughed it off and said nobody would know. But this wasn't enough for me. I try to avoid conflict, but when I'm in a situation, I'll follow it through. I looked her up on Facebook and found out that she was married. Nobody knew this. So when she had the affair with the other manager and basically blackmailed him, she was also married and cheating. I don't think anyone ever cared enough to find out because she was a nasty old lady. So I found the old manager's Mark Facebook and found out he and his wife were separated. Turns out even after he quit, Betty was still trying to blackmail money out of him. When he didn't, she told his wife anyway, causing his wife to divorce him and basically leave him to go back to live with his parents. I did some research, and in my state, blackmail or extortion is a third-degree penalty, which has a max of 7 years in prison, with a fine of over $10,000 to the victim. So I told the old manager what my plan was for her. He agreed to call the cops on her, but I asked if he'd wait until I finished my part first. He said he'd give me a week. So I met with the district manager Ben and showed him all our evidence. The recordings and the written statement from my other ex-coworkers and people who were still working there. I also gave Ben the slips of paper when Betty clocked in and then left and returned 8 to 10 hours later to clock out. Ben thanked me for the information and then I left. A few days later, while walking past the store, I noticed it was closed in the middle of the day. I texted a guy who still worked there, and he told me everything. Turns out, Ben first checked the security cameras to see if she was there for the full time she claimed to be. Big surprise, she wasn't. So Ben decided to investigate the store's expenses, since if she's lying about her time, what else could she be stealing? He found out she was stealing money from the store. The guy didn't fully explain how she was, but just that she was. Turns out she was breaking a lot of health and safety codes and used the money for repairs, etc. for herself. So she was fired immediately, along with her minions, and that left barely anybody to run the store. They shut down to clean up the store and fix things she didn't make. So she's out of a job, and Mark told her husband with photo proof, granny nudes, I know, ew, that she cheated on him. But Mark phrased it so it seemed like she still was. So Betty's husband flips out and decides to divorce her, and Betty is the type to post everything on Facebook. So she's begging someone to let her stay, but all of her friends and family totally bailed on her. So she was living in her car looking for a job. That's when Mark decides to sue her for extortion. So she scrambles to find a lawyer. And to make it even worse, the company decided to sue her for all the money she stole, plus all the repairs and lost revenue while the store is closed. Betty's life is crap. She had to sell her car for drastically under what it's worth to pay for all the legal trouble. Mark told me bits and pieces of her crying in the courtroom, but not too much. I was never super close with him. Last I heard of Betty, she was living with her sister, who definitely hates her. To think she would have avoided all of this if she just let me quit. You know when they say sometimes bad things happen for a good reason? Well, this feels like one of those cases where the bad thing happened, she was treated terribly at the job, and when she tried to quit, she got fired just because she was so petty. But because of that firing, all of the bad things that happened to Betty came right back at her, 100 times the speed that she threw them. Betty, 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 you got everything you deserve. My husband and I are in our late 30s and child-free. Some people on child-free said I should post here too, so enjoy the saga. My husband and I have been saving for almost a decade to move to a tropical paradise. About 2 years ago, we bit the bullet and moved to our dream location. Housing here is super expensive, like Hawaii prices, so all we could afford was a half of a duplex. It is beautiful, and on the water with places for our boat. Unfortunately, Karen, Billy Bob the boyfriend, and her 3 gremlins live in the other unit. Setup. There is some period of time we just went for a week here and there, but we live here full time now. The entire duplex was owned by an older gentleman who rented out both sides. The sides do not match at all. One side is a 5-bedroom, 3-bath. The other side of the duplex is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. We bought the 5-bedroom. On our side of the property, we have 90% of the backyard, a gazebo, and dockage, about 150 foot since it's on the corner. The other side has a small backyard, patio, and maybe 15 foot of dockage. The rental lease says the renters are entitled to their specific backyards, but there were no fences or anything, so all the renters shared the entire backyard. After we bought the house, Karen immediately tried to throw her weight around that they were expected to continue with that privilege. I told her if she asked politely, we would try to accommodate her. She thought this meant she could use our backyard whenever she wanted. Party incident. One day my husband and I are enjoying some drinks outside when a delivery truck shows to set up a giant blow-up thing in our backyard. I asked Karen WTF she thought she was doing, and she said it was for her kid's birthday. Then she had the gall to say it was a family and friends only event, so we had to stay inside our house. Not wanting to be a total jerk and ruin some little girl's birthday, I told Karen after this she had no access to our backyard, period. Karen shrugged and kept setting up for the party. During the party, a drunk adult wandered into our house, which shocked us all. I said Karen's house is the other side, and he said, "Oh, Karen said she owned the whole property and to use whichever bathroom was available." I directed him to Karen's bathroom, and soon after that she came storming into our house, screaming about how dare we make her look bad to her friends, and how selfish we are, we couldn't even spare one bathroom. She said we didn't deserve all this space with just us. I told Karen to get the heck out of my house or I'd be calling the cops. She finally left and the party wrapped up shortly after. The backyard remodel. After the party incident, we decided we needed to clearly define the backyard and build a fence. While we were spending the money, we decided to update the patio, put in a fire pit and an outdoor kitchen. While the contractor was on site, nosy Karen had to come investigate. Since the fence would be the last thing built, I was vague and just stuck to telling her about the patio update. You could see her face light up because of course in her mind, what's ours is hers. When the workers started on the fence, Karen came out screaming for the work to stop. I went outside and told the workers to keep working and told Karen to butt out. Of course, in true Karen fashion, she called the cops. What happened next was hilarity on my part. After explaining to the cop that we were building a fence on our property and the landlord, of which Karen was not, knew about it. When the cop gave Karen a stern lecture, I thought her head was going to explode. She went back into her house and slammed the sliding door so hard it sounded like something cracked. We got our fence and I thought that would be the end. But of course not. The boat incident. One day Billy Bob entered the picture and he was as much a terrible neighbor as Karen. He would throw cigarette butts and empty beer cans over our fence for disrespecting his woman. I didn't know Paradise had trailer trash, but Billy Bob is the epitome of this stereotype. Billy Bob has a boat, a 30-foot fishing boat to be precise. Of course, that side of the duplex only had 15 foot of dockage. Since we had so much dockage and only one boat, we rent out the other dockage as month to month. People come and go. So if we don't receive rent by them by the end of the month and the boat disappears, we think nothing of it. We had a renter who tied up their boat on the property line, but Billy Bob wanted to park his boat and needed the space. Karen and Billy Bob posed as us, we were out of town, told the renters to be gone at the end of the month, and then parked Billy Bob's boat on the dockage. I only found out about it weeks later because the renter left a nasty review on the rental site we use. They said we were rude and went back on the verbal agreement to let them stay for 3 more months. I was like, what the frick is all this? After a phone call, I quickly put 2 and 2 together. I called the cops who told Karen and Billy Bob they need to move their boat or it would be towed. The equivalent of it anyway. Karen and Billy Bob started screaming the boat is fully on their property, isn't it? Then changed to, no one can own the water. True, but a seawall is deeded. That we're all liars. And at some point, Billy Bob punched a cop and went to jail. I felt bad for the cops, so took them all snacks and the next day with a note apologizing for neighbor drama. I ended up winning my small claim suit against them for lost rental income, but of course haven't seen a dime. I eventually convinced the dockage renters to come back and gave them a few months free as compensation. Final revenge. So with the collapsing market, we were trying to figure out what to do with our savings when a perfect opportunity opened up. The landlord who owned both properties was in desperate need of some cash. and was tired of managing the property from 2,000 miles away, because of course Karen is a Karen and called him weekly for every little thing. His only stipulation was we let the poor single mum who has been his renter for 8 years finish her lease, which is up in July. Since we just have money we were trying to reinvest, and because now we get to control our neighbors, heck yeah we jumped on that. Since we didn't need a realtor or mortgage, and an inspection had been done just a year ago for the old landlord to refinance, everything closed in just under 2 weeks. Karen was aware of a change of ownership. We registered the property under an LLC, but didn't know who until 8 days ago. I went over to Karen's house and knocked on the door. Karen answered with a, "What the frick do you want, see?" I smiled, handed her our landlord information, and sweetly reminded her rent was due by Friday. But she could just hand me the check if it was easier. I've always heard descriptions of people's faces turning white, but this was the first time I have actually seen it. I told Karen that we were honoring her lease until the end of July, but afterwards, she'd better make plans to move, because we intend to remodel it before these next tenants move in. Bye, B. That look on her face would have been priceless. I don't know how long it was that they were living next door to each other, but imagine for years you hate this neighbor because they don't let you have your way by letting their drunk friends come into your house. Then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, now I own the house you live in. And you're gonna have to move soon. It's the perfect justice and revenge. Submit your story to be read on the channel at voiceyherestories@gmail.com and join our Voicey veteran community at r/VoiceyHere. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode. Alright, Voicey veterans, I'll see you in the next one.